Yeah, let's get it started. So I'm curious to the guys from Adobe. What's new? What's coming next all around AEM Headless?
Should I start? Because I kind of worked on the APIs that will help you model everything. What's new, and you saw it already hinted in Duy's talk yesterday, and a bit today, I think, in Georg's and Evgeny's talk, is a new set of APIs for the data plane. So you have a full support for CRUD, for fragments and models, and also for their, what I call from the API perspective, the domain specific objects. So the APIs allow you to manipulate tags on both fragments and models, variations for fragments, versioning, and I think there's one more that I'm missing, one domain specific object that's still there. You have kind of support for the whole flow, so you can create a model, then you start creating a fragment based on it, then you start editing the fragment, then you can version it, restore the version at some point, you can do publishing, basically have the full control of what the authoring experience would be from the UI as APIs, as a set of APIs. That's already been made public with the August release. Do not ask me what the release identifier is, I don't know it, but it's the public August release. It is available. I wouldn't yet recommend you to start using it in production. There are still a few corner cases that we have to look at, but they are good enough and stable enough that they support the new content fragments editor, which probably a lot of you have already seen. It was launched for, I think, a year as a beta program, and it reached GA, I think, 3 weeks ago or something like that. So everything that you see in the content fragments editor is powered by those APIs. Any kind of action that UI does, you can also do it programmatically from APIs. Quick sneak peek, because it's almost ready. So it's still in the oven baking, but it's almost ready. We're going to have native events for fragments and models. So we call them, technically, we call them content change and content state events. The content change are the ones that happen through CRUD operations. So you get events for content fragment created, modified, deleted. You see which properties have been modified, but not the values, because that would be a breach of, of security layers. And you get events for publishing and unpublished. So that's the content state change. And they're going to come soon. We're kind of testing that the whole integration works, because I think it's 3 or 4 layers involved in sending the events. You're going to be able to use I/O events for this, to subscribe to them. And then you can handle them either as webhooks. So you can register your own webhook, you get an event, and you react on it. Or there's the other option with I/O events, where you can use the journaling API to consume those events. Obviously, you have trade-offs and advantages using either or. It really depends on the use cases. I guess this should cover it from the data plane point of view.
Yeah, so I can add to that, like from the consumer perspective, because as a JS developer, I'm excited to have like more support that is decoupled from the original Java stack. Don't get me wrong, if you're a Java developer, totally fine, and you keep going. But yeah, as a non-Java developer, it's good that we have decoupled stack, so that you can like have the flexibility to develop your front-end apps with like what you preferred. Namely, for example, in the yesterday section, we show Next.js in React as well as SquareScript, or any other framework.
Thank you for bringing us up to speed on the roadmap. Now we're changing a bit the topic, and it's about SEO and Google indexing. Anian is curious, what are the SEO and Google indexing implications of a headless client-side rendered SPA application? There are a lot of conflicting information out there. Indexing, e.g. by Google, is it working fine? Or do you always need SSR for good SEO and indexing?
So I'm not quite clear why it is an indexing problem, because like when you, well, I mean, as I said just before, you as a developer have the the freedom to choose what works best for your application, right? So you can of course write like pure JS apps that control the rendering of the content, or you can write SBA if that is useful for your use case, and SSR like if that matches your need. Of course, like people say that SEO, in order to optimize SEO, you need SSR. It's not always the case. There are other ways, like Marcus already showed in the edge delivery service earlier. Yeah.
Maybe to add to this, I think server-side rendering is key here. So with obviously React, but also with Svelte Kit, you can do server-side rendering, and then it gets easier.
Or even take Lucian's suggestion from yesterday, do hybrid rendering when it would make sense. Render the stuff that's part of the CEO and that's not the CEO information that's not extremely dynamic server side, and then hydrate your app on top with client-side calls when it makes sense. I mean, you know that Google runs JavaScript, client-side JavaScript, but depending on how long that takes, you might be penalized. So maybe you want to do the important part server side and then just hydrate on top.
Konrad is highlighting something like he would like to know, is there any best practices on making DDoS attacks against GraphQL endpoints harder?
That's targeted. I feel it.
Well, there's one obvious one is to use persistent queries, right?
Yes, so persistent queries, I guess, would be the simplest answer to that, because they get cached in the dispatcher. I mean, that's the whole idea with the persistent queries. Another option is, I created a long time ago an issue in Sling and didn't get time to work on it, but I wanted to limit the time that a GraphQL query is allowed to execute, and then configure that. And then if the query takes too long, then just completely stop the processing. So then you can control that. I have something working, I think, roughly on a branch, but it was not good enough to open a PR.
Henry would like to know, are you thinking of getting rid of the post requests for the saved queries, as they are difficult to cache and pose extra load on your AEM instances?
Should I take this one again? Post queries in general for GraphQL, or we're not talking about persistent queries, right?
I think I read in the documentation that potentially it will be removed to be able to directly fire post or GraphQL queries to the publisher.
Yeah, I mean, there are two ways to execute GraphQL, right? It's get or post. Get has certain limitations. Post is not cacheable. Definitely not in this context. Post in general could be cacheable if you do your homework right. It's difficult to say we remove it, right? You close the door to some use cases that definitely cannot be handled with get. And technically, even with get, I could find interesting ways to create a DDoS attack, right? I could just swap the order of the parameters, and then for every HTTP layer, that's a different URI. So even if I cached it before, I'm just going to create new projections of that same result. One idea that I had here, which again, I didn't get to implement it, but I thought about it, would be you have a query, right? And then that query, no matter how you sort the parameters, should have a canonical form. If you can transform any query that you get from a client into a canonical form and say, I actually know about this query. We executed it once. It's the exact same thing. I don't care about the order of the parameters. You could mitigate it. This could also technically be implemented at the project level. I mean, if you look at how the Sling GraphQL core servlet is defined in Sling, it's a configurable component and requires a configuration. So whenever you use it, you actually have to configure it and activate it. In AEM, we wrap the GraphQL servlet and expose it because we want to use the same servlet but use it at different endpoints or on different resource types. So we wrap it. The same thing you could do in your own custom project. You could technically wrap it and then add some filters on top or add some mitigations in your own servlet where you try to circumvent obvious things that an attacker could do. Obviously, attackers, if we're not working in security here in the circle, they're way smarter than we are. So unless you're a hacker yourself or a white hat hacker, I think they're always going to be one step ahead of us. They don't always, look at the parameters. Sometimes they figure out, you're using this library behind the scenes, and I know that there is a call where it's going to get put into the execution path. So I'm just going to use this exploit.
And I mean, probably to add here, because Stefan, you mentioned that yesterday in your talk, that it's more flexible, obviously, and more the nature of GraphQL to do live, like non-cached queries. So just know what you're doing exactly, try to secure it as much as you can.
And you can always block posting in the dispatcher. If you not require it, you can just block it on your infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, if you can make your application work exclusively with persisted queries, so if you don't want to allow your customers to do search based on GraphQL, you could just use persisted queries, and then you cache them into the dispatcher, and then you should be safe. Except if who wrote the query wrote an extremely complicated query, and then it's going to take too long. But it's at least only one request that's going to hit the origin.
I mean, there can also be the use case for authenticated users only if there is a more app-like thing running on publisher, and then it's not a problem anymore. So then you can also make sure on dispatcher that only authenticated requests come through, and then it's also fine again.
Now we've got some questions around CDNs. So, is it going to be possible to use another CDN, for example, Akamai or Cloudflare, to cache the static content instead the Fastly in AEM as a cloud service?
Oh, that's really not my area.
Yeah, I think it's more like the question for the cloud service. I'm not sure if there's a panel for that. That would be.
No, we have only
okay.
this one.
Then or probably the expert.
Yeah, probably come to the playground session. We have some people with export for dispatcher and CDN and so. So, yeah. To my knowledge, it's possible, but it's not really recommended because you have your additional CDN in front of. At current, you have not full control about the Fastly CDN as well. This should improve as far as I've seen. There's some new pipeline coming for having more control about the Fastly stuff, but I've not seen it myself.
There are scenarios where customers can bring their own CDN, but I think they're always fronting Fastly. So that's the way we route the request. It always goes through the amcloud.com domain, which is Fastly. Then it goes internal to our domains, and then it hits AEM. But you cannot take Fastly out of the scene. You could maybe try to control it not to cache, although it would be quite dangerous. I wouldn't do it, because if somehow you didn't configure your own CDN correctly, then you're going to hit the origin. And depending on how your application is built and what you wrote, it could become very noisy.
And maybe just a reason for the ones that it's not clear. So Fastly you can't replace because there's some functionality of the product that is really linked into it. So in theory it's black box, but one thing I know, not working for Adobe, is that big assets are delivered directly from a cloud infrastructure, not going through the JVM, which is a good thing. And that's also the reason why you can't just like replace Fastly, you can only add something in front.
Similar topic also about like Wolf is highlighting that about feature Akamai, for example, has that caching GraphQL is possible in the proxy-CDN, understands the protocol and is able to construct a cache key even for the post request. Is there such thing is possible with Akamai? So will Adobe put in work to enable it in Dispatcher or Adobe CDN?
We haven't discussed about this at all. We thought about different strategies to cache GraphQL queries, and we didn't find the best compromise to do it. You still want some dynamic queries. You still want to be able to have the option to either partially cache stuff like Apollo does, or like completely cache stuff, also like Apollo does. But it's not really a specification. It's each vendor's implementation, and we wouldn't like to be locked with a vendor-specific definition of how caching should work. What I recently noticed that's happening now in the GraphQL area is that they're publishing or working on a new draft spec. I haven't seen anything related to caching yet, but I expect that is going to appear, because every time you hear a conversation about APIs, right? You have 3 or 4 styles, and I'm kind of going to my talk tomorrow. But the main argument against GraphQL is caching. how do you cache it? Because you obviously cannot cache it at the HTTP layer, which is kind of problematic because the whole web works like this. So everybody kind of became creative of how they mark what they want to cache. So the answer is no, we're not going to implement something like Akamai. As soon as there's going to be a standard, we're definitely going to support it or try to support it, but we're not going to go with vendor-defined ways of caching.
Well, so regarding caching, I think one layer is like on the server layer, but there's also like on the client layer, right? Because I mean, like what you've seen in the hybrid rendering demo, like it doesn't need to be cached by AEM, but like in the framework or in the stack that you are using to render your app, you can also like apply the custom caching logic there, which allows you to customize like what and how long you want to cache, right? So yeah, that could be another way in headless that you can consider.
THH has a very cool question because those went through my mind. Considering the conference talks till now, we all get a bit the impression that Adobe is distancing itself from AEM and Sling. Does classic AEM still have a future, or is it becoming just another content storage among?
No, it's not going to be just another content storage. I mean, the proof that you are here and the proof that Adobe has so many speakers at the conference and that the topics have been relatively varied, I think it's proof that the new way of authoring is just another option. It's just another tool that you have available. And that there are use cases that Edge services with its document authoring can fulfill, and there are use cases that AEM with its classical delivery can fulfill better. It's just another tool in the toolbox. I mean, you know how it is. Just because everything looks like a nail doesn't mean that everything that you have to use is a hammer, right?
Mm-hmm. Would be a very expensive storage.
Yeah, I mean, maybe to add, like there is a use case for WYSIWYG editing, like classic WYSIWYG editing. I mean, also like how did we even get into this whole headless thing, which is only a technical aspect, like it's interesting. Like first of all, obviously the business wants omnichannel, and there makes sense content reuse. But also, like I remember some people, like a front-end person, like 5 years ago already, like complaining, AEM is so complex, and back then they developed with AEM, like our people still often do, but sometimes it gets less because now we have more separate ways and different development workflows that are also fun. Stefan said it; he loved it. I mean, the regular thing. So yeah, it's good, all side by side. Let's use the best stuff that is there for the use case.
Yeah, it shows that the whole ecosystem around of AEM is still living and refreshing itself constantly, which is nice. If we only are doing all the old Sling stuff and OSI stuff still, then maybe other will go past us. And so it's nice. We have a really rich tool set now available, which for all types of projects. And yourself can learn something new as well.
You highlighted it, Georg, about content editing. So following a bit up on that, like on the content fragment side, there are like many standard dialogues for component and techniques are not available, or for example, multi-field wrapped around a combination of children. And yeah, it's also not possible to include snippets like you do in normal dialogues. So.
I think, for example, yesterday you see in the universe editor, we had the property rail on the right side. So that is something that we created newly. It's an abstraction of what you see in the content fragment editor. And as already mentioned, that has like plug and play mechanism. So it aims to make things more modular and more reusable. And I think at some point of time, the content fragment editor would also be making use of it so that it would be more easy for you to provide your model and extend the components there. But instead of things being so tightly coupled with the CF editor itself. So we are kind of starting the same thing with the universal editor. So here you saw already yesterday with the model how easy it is to extend fields, and we of course provide out of the box a lot of components, but it's quite easy in it to provide your own set of custom components and kind of extend things, and you're not tied to just what we provide. And the idea is, and the hope is, that it should be also available in the CF editor sometime in the future.
And with Cloud Service and with the new editor, there's the option to extend almost any UI that you have available in the unified shell with App Builder. And with a new set of APIs, you kind of have control to, you get the same control that the new content fragment editor has itself on that data. So if you feel that you would have maybe a better implementation, or you want an extension to what the default new content fragment editor does, you could definitely fulfill that use case with App Builder.
Also around content fragments, Dirk tells us with content fragments you can only model domain objects like products, blog posts, etc. But how do you add a page to navigation to, for example, for legal FAQ pages to make a SPA website?
Well, if you join the Headless trial program, we have the kind of the educational app there. It's called Sparkle, and it's exactly made based on that. Like you have a page, and then inside the page you have multiple panels. You can like scroll through the panels, and then in panels you have like image, title, like different assets, and so on and so forth. So yeah, why not? That's an SPA, and that's based on content fragment.
Are there any plan of releasing the new content fragment editor for AEM on-premise as well?
We have discussed it internally, but we haven't made a plan. There are quite a few differences between on-premise and AEM as a cloud service, the APIs being one of them. So it's an implementation that kind of uses the latest modules from Sling and some new modules which we haven't yet tested if they work correctly on 6.5 or if they would be easy to backport. So the discussion exists there, but we don't have any roadmap item for it or anything that I could tell you, yeah, it's going to be ready in that amount of time. We are looking into it, but we haven't started. I mean, the first thing we want to do is to actually get the API GA, right? So now it's public. You can see how it looks like. You can try to play with it. Don't use it in production yet. After we're out with it GA, then we can revisit this question, because we also asked ourselves the same thing. It would definitely help migrating from on-prem to cloud service easier, I guess.
Robin needs some recommendation. How do you recommend to keep control of versioning of content, like content structures, etc., if your content is consumed by many different applications, especially when content gets restructured or moved around?
In the API, we start taking the direction of using IDs. And the next step is to bring those IDs into the way that Confront references itself. So if you're an old AEM developer or like an AEM developer with a lot of experience, you know that kind of everything was path-based. So all your references relied on the path being in the repository. If you had to do a migration of your content, you had to readjust your references, and that's not a trivial thing to do. Now we're switching to ID, so I also hope that we can bring this into the implementation itself, or the references itself is just an ID, so they can move stuff freely around without losing the context and how elements were linked together. Regarding how to structure your content, I couldn't give you a recipe. It really depends on your use case. It really depends on how that content is going to be consumed. Do you need a lot of information to be returned at once together? Then you need to use references. Do you need to build those references later? You don't need that information in the same request. Then maybe you can segregate it. I really couldn't tell you. It really depends on your app and your use case and your domain.
In one of the previous talks, someone posted it like on an opinion on it, like on use of persisted queries. Why use GraphQL if you have to fix so many issues to get it work nicely when you can use like good old REST?
Well, there are differences, and I can't go into the talk that I'm going to have tomorrow. Each tool shines at certain use cases. GraphQL is very good at searching, and it's very good at filtering. REST is very good at delivering without necessarily having a pre-baked structure, right? The promise of REST is that you have one entry point into your app and a media type, and from there you don't need to build any kind of knowledge into the client because the client will just follow links and discover the space. And then you have the new kid on the block. Should I do the talk today now? I have 4 minutes left. And then you have OpenAPI, right, which defines your whole space. Each has pros and cons. I would definitely use GraphQL for search use cases. I would stick to REST maybe for delivery, and I would use OpenAPI for data plane or control plane APIs where you actually need structure. You could obviously mix and match. You could try to do delivery with GraphQL, but then if you're not really search intensive, it doesn't make sense. So then you have persistent queries. You could do delivery with OpenAPI, but then you kind of limit the space that you have for those URLs because you have to give the client the knowledge of what the URI space is. It's a quite theoretical discussion, but that's how I would use personally GraphQL. If I need to search, GraphQL. You can obviously implement search with REST. I think you can do it. You can also do it with OpenAPI, but it just becomes a bit more complicated than with GraphQL.
Yeah, there's also like the question about which web framework do you recommend to use in a combination with AEM Headless approach, considering high customer traffic on the website?
Well, so yeah, I hate to repeat myself, but yeah, really, I think it's because if you see in the industry today, you have React, Next.js, you have Svelte again, Angular, right, Vue, and so on. So first of all, it depends on if you have existing code already, right? So if you have like a nicely written storybook with React components, I don't see any reason stop doing that. Well, maybe with React Server components, like you saw yesterday in the hybrid rendering approach, that will help to boost your performance. If you want to go with like pure JS to have full control over your DOM manipulation, just go ahead with that. So the point of Headless is to make development of your client app decoupled from like any opinionated front-end development, right? So, yeah, the choice is yours.
Okay. To close a bit the circle, to come back where we started, like on the product roadmap, is there any plans to extend the GraphQL API with a business logic layer to have more control on the data delivered?
I think I would need more details about this question because it's very broad. Maybe we can talk about it today in the Meet the Experts group where we have a bit more space.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, and I was keeping the one for the very last because we're all close coming to an end. Because we all know the term "everything is content." I think everybody ever heard it. And now the question is everything is content dead?
No. But I guess you have to figure out what's content, what's code, and what's application code, what's application configuration. We had this thing before, right, where we said everything was content, and then Carl and I fought it on on one front where we said, okay, no, actually scripts, the server-side scripts for rendering, they're not actually content, they're application code. So we try to pull it out. They're still in the repository, but they're actually not really used unless we were not able to compile it. I wouldn't say that everything is content. It used to be like that, but it's not completely that, right? Your application's content, like the stuff that feeds your pages and stuff, content, application stuff.
Maybe
different folder, right? If it's conf, it's still content, right? It's in the repository, but it's a configuration.
Maybe a Franklin spin on it, so content on Google Drive and content on GitHub. Well, it looks a bit different, but yes, it's all content.
Everything is content. Exactly. And with that, thank you for your participation. Thank you, Stefan, Duy, Radu, Sharanya, and Georg.